So, France in 1793. Things were not going swimmingly. On the outside, you have most of Europe, led by Austria and Prussia, deciding they really didn't like the whole dethroning a king vibe and were invading. Inside, the Vendée region was in open, bloody revolt, and hyperinflation made a loaf of bread a luxury item. The brand new republic was fragile, like a newborn holding a hand grenade. The response from the government, the National Convention, was predictable for anyone who has ever seen a group of terrified people given absolute power. They created the Committee of Public Safety. The name itself is a masterpiece of political marketing. It sounds so reassuring, doesn't it? Like a neighborhood watch committee, but with the authority to declare you an enemy of existence. Their job was to protect the revolution from its enemies, a category whose definition would soon become wonderfully flexible. This wasn't a slow slide into tyranny, it was a bungee jump with a frayed cord. The Committee of Public Safety was essentially a 12-man executive board with the cheat codes to the entire country. And at its heart was Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer from Arras, impeccably dressed, who genuinely believed that the only way to forge a perfect republic of virtue was through terror. He wasn't a monster foaming at the mouth, he was worse. He was a calm, rational, deeply principled ideologue who could justify mass murder with a well-written essay. Alongside him was Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, the Angel of Death. Younger, more handsome, and somehow even more terrifyingly certain of his own righteousness. He once declared, "The vessel of the revolution can arrive in port only on a sea reddened by torrents of blood." Charming. These weren't just politicians, they were social engineers who saw the French population as raw material for their utopian blueprint, and they weren't afraid to trim the excess. To make their job easier, the committee passed the law of suspects in September 1793. This law is a work of art if your art is paranoia. It allowed for the arrest of anyone who, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, by their conduct, associations, comments, or writings have shown themselves partisans of tyranny or federalism and enemies of liberty. It also targeted those who couldn't show they had a job and were being good citizens. This meant if your neighbor thought you didn't seem enthusiastic enough about the latest government decree, he could have you arrested. If you were a noble who just hadn't fled the country, you were suspect. If you were a priest who hadn't sworn the right oath, suspect. The prison started filling up with people whose main crime was being insufficiently cheerful. It's the ultimate vibe check legislation, and failing it meant an appointment with the National Razor. With the prisons overflowing, the committee needed a way to process people efficiently. Enter the Revolutionary Tribunal. Think of it as a justice system designed by an assembly line foreman. Its public prosecutor was Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, a man who pursued convictions with the single-minded passion of a heat-seeking missile. At first, there was some pretense of a trial. You got a lawyer, though they weren't allowed much time to prepare. Witnesses might be called, but the whole affair was geared towards one outcome. The definition of evidence became ludicrously broad. Marie Antoinette was convicted partly on the basis of vile, fabricated rumors about her son. The Girondins, a rival political faction, were condemned as a group. Eventually, they just started trying people in large batches, or fournées, to save time. Justice was not blind. She was wearing a stopwatch and tapping her foot impatiently. And the instrument of this new, efficient justice was the guillotine. Before you picture it as some medieval torture device, remember, this was the Enlightenment. The guillotine was considered a triumph of humanitarian reason. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine didn't invent it, but he advocated for it as a humane alternative to the messy, often botched executions of the old regime. One quick, painless, and, crucially, egalitarian slice. The noble and the commoner got the exact same death. How progressive! The reality was a public spectacle of industrialized death. Crowds gathered daily at the Place de la Révolution to watch the show. Women, known as tricoteuses, would sit and knit, a chillingly domestic scene amidst the state-sanctioned slaughter. They even sold miniature guillotine toys for children. The line between revolutionary justice and grotesque carnival entertainment had completely evaporated. The revolution wasn't just against the monarchy, it was against the entire old way of thinking. This included God. A powerful de-Christianization movement swept through France, championed by radicals like Jacques Hubert. Churches were stripped of their bells to be melted down for cannons. Religious icons were smashed. The Great Cathedral of Notre Dame was rededicated as the Temple of Reason, complete with a ceremony featuring an actress dressed as the Goddess of Reason. They even replaced the Gregorian calendar. The new Republican calendar had 12 months with poetic names like Brumaire, fog, and Thermidor, heat, each with 3 10-day weeks. The goal was to erase every trace of religion and monarchy from daily life. It was a breathtakingly arrogant attempt to reboot an entire culture, assuming you can just delete centuries of tradition with a government decree. Humans have always been great at this sort of thing. Once you start defining enemy this broadly, it's only a matter of time before you start seeing them in your own lunchroom. By early 1794, the paranoia was eating the revolutionaries themselves. First, Robespierre went after the radicals to his left, the Hubertists, who he felt were too extreme and atheistic. They went to the guillotine. Then he turned on the indulgents to his right, led by his old friend Georges Danton, who argued it was time to wind down the terror. A terrible career move. Danton's last words to the executioner were supposedly, "Show my head to the people. It is worth seeing." Even facing death, the man had an ego. Robespierre was now the undisputed master of the revolution, having systematically executed anyone who disagreed with him. He had successfully purged all dissent, creating a perfectly unified movement of people who were all thinking, "Please don't let him notice me." At the absolute pinnacle of his power, what does Robespierre do? Throw a massive, bizarre national party, the Festival of the Supreme Being, in June 1794. Robespierre, who disliked the atheism of the de-Christianizers, wanted to replace Catholicism with his own deist cult. So he organized this event in Paris, featuring a giant papier-mâché statue of atheism, which he ceremoniously set on fire to reveal a statue of wisdom underneath. He led the procession wearing a sky-blue coat and carrying a bouquet of flowers and wheat, looking for all the world like the high priest of a new state religion. For his colleagues in the convention, this was the final straw. They had killed a king to get rid of a monarchy and a state religion. Now Robespierre looked like he was auditioning to be both a dictator and a pope. The whispers against him grew into a roar. Just as his colleagues were getting nervous, Robespierre decided to double down. He helped pass the Law of 22 Prairial. This new law stripped away what few rights accused people had left.
no defense witnesses, no defense counsel. The only possible verdicts were acquittal or death. The tribunal's guiding principle was now any kind of evidence, material or moral, that can convince a reasonable mind. It was a blank check for execution. The period after this law is called the Great Terror. The guillotines in Paris went into overdrive. More people were executed in the final month and a half than in the entire preceding year. This is what sealed his fate. He had created a murder machine so efficient and arbitrary that no one felt safe. When Robespierre gave a speech threatening yet another purge without naming names, the members of the convention realized it was either him or them. So they chose them.
On the 9th of Thermidor, that's July 27, 1794, for those not on the revolutionary calendar, the convention shouted Robespierre down and ordered his arrest. After a chaotic 24 hours involving a botched rescue attempt and a self-inflicted jaw wound, Robespierre, Saint-Just, and their allies were sent to the guillotine. No trial, of course. That would have been entirely too ironic. The man who perfected the terror was consumed by it. The Thermidorian reaction began. The terror was over. But what did it accomplish? It probably did help consolidate power and fight off foreign invasion, but at a cost of around 40,000 lives and the soul of the revolution. It created a political vacuum and a deep yearning for stability. And when people who have lived through chaos want stability, they'll often turn to the guy on a horse with a big army. Speaking of which, a certain young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte was just starting to make a name for himself. But that's a story for another time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!